All right, I'm gonna go ahead and broadcast. Kim, I'll let you know when we're good to go.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to say the names of Black, trans, and cis people whose lives have abruptly ended in violence at the hands of police or others. Nakia Crawford, Rhea Milton, Dominique Fels, Nina Pop, Breonna Taylor, Priscilla Slater, Regis Krasinski-Paquet, Tony McDade, Oluwatoyin Salu, Rayshard Brooks, George Floyd, David McAtee, Ahmaud Arbery. Ashe. My name is Kim L. Hunt, and I'm the Executive Director of Pride Action Tank, a project of the AIDS Foundation of Chicago, where I also serve as the Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy Operations. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight for part 2 of our 2-part discussion, The Census, COVID-19 and Beyond, Resilience and Vulnerability in LGBTQ+ communities. I want to thank our co-sponsors, AIDS Foundation of Chicago and Howard Brown Health, and thank you to our funders, Forefront and YWCA. So tonight, our discussion will look at intersecting issues faced by both LGBTQ+ older adults and youth. And while these are 2 parts of the community that do face unique challenges, one thing that we know from a recent needs assessment by the Morton Group, both in 2012 and last year, is that there are some similarities in terms of services and resource gaps, including access to quality, culturally competent healthcare, affordable housing, knowledge about benefits and resources available to them, and isolation. So tonight we'll discuss the role the census plays in decision-making about the many resources and services we encounter in our daily lives and at specific times like election year, or when we need medical services or other resources. And of course, we can't talk about the census without talking about the 2 pandemics shaping our lives right now and for the foreseeable future. The COVID-19 pandemic and the racism pandemic. And that last pandemic is a common thread through everything we'll be discussing tonight. So there are folks joining us on Zoom, but also through Facebook Live. And we encourage you to enter your questions and comments in the chat box or post them to the Facebook pages of the AIDS Foundation of Chicago or Pride Action Tank. And my lovely colleagues, Jack, Jackie, and Keys are working behind the scenes to keep things running smoothly and to help make sure your questions get to me. And I promise we will answer as many of them as we can. Sometimes we don't get to all of them, but we'll do our best. We have an amazing panel coming up, but before we go to the panel, we're going to receive a performance by Jace William. So Jace is a singer-songwriter and native to Chicago. Jace started his musical journey in the 4th grade as a tuba player under the direction of Diane Ellis, a Chicago jazz star. His influences include, this is quite a range, so get ready, Chris Cornell, Barry White, Tupac, Pat Benatar, and many more. Jace William prides himself on his unique ability to captivate his audiences through his storytelling. I just want people to see themselves in my music. I believe my journey is unique to me, but relatable to many, says William. Jace William believes that music is healing, therapeutic, and necessary for the human experience. He is currently working on his next project, How Am I Still Standing?, scheduled for release later this year. Turn on your applause emojis and join me in welcoming Jace William.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Just give me a thumbs up. Awesome. Thank you so much for the opportunity. This one you might know. Now this is a story all about how my life got flipped, turned upside down. Now I'd like to take a minute to sit right there. I'll tell you how I became the prince in a town called Bel Air. In West Philadelphia, born and raised on the playground is where I spend most of my days. Chilling out, maxing, relaxing, all cool. Shooting some b-ball outside of school. When a couple of guys, they were up to no good. Started making trouble in my neighborhood. I got in one little fight and my mom's got scared. She said, "You're moving with your auntie and uncle in Bel Air." Oh, summertime. Time to sit back and unwind. Summertime. Time to sit back and unwind. I whistled for a cab when it came near. The license plate said fresh and had a dice in the mirror. If anything I could say, this cab was rare, but I thought, no, forget it, you homes to Bel Air. I pulled up to the house about 7 or 8, and I yelled to the cab, "Yo, home, smell you later." Looked in my kingdom, I was finally there. Sit on my throne as the prince of Bel Air. Oh, summertime. Time to sit back and unwind. Summertime. Time to sit back and unwind. Thank you.
Jace, you can't hear, or maybe you can see some of this, but there is applause and people are loving it. There are questions in the chat about who is this? Jace William, everybody. Jace William. You're going to see more of Jace, I promise you, in this program. And I am going to be asking Jace to come back to other Pride Action Tank programs as well. There's also a link that I think Jack just put in the chat box for some of Jace's music. So thank you so much, Jace, for that. That was a wonderful way to get us started. And now I'm going to introduce our panelists. And I'm doing this in alphabetical order. Don Bell is a native Chicagoan with a deep commitment to social justice. Don spent his professional career in higher education administration and student affairs at the University of Illinois, Governor State University, Joliet Junior College, and the Illinois Institute of Technology. He is a founding member and past president of the Association of Campus Activities and Administrators. And I want to say, as a former ED of Affinity Community Services, that Don was actually instrumental in helping that organization get started by providing meeting spaces, which, as you know, is kind of tough to find sometimes when you don't have that access in different parts of the city. So thank you, Don, for that. Don provided serial long-term care for his two parents while raising two sons as a single custodial parent. And now has 6 beautiful grandchildren. Don is a member of the first out generation of LGBT plus seniors, and Don is also on Pride Action Tank's Out Aging Committee. So that's Don. Next, we have Maya Brown. Maya is Community Engagement and Volunteer Service Manager for Renaissance Social Services. Maya is a trans woman of color from the South Side of Chicago and an LGBTQIA community advocate. Born and raised in the heart of Inglewood, Maya experienced firsthand the adversity of poverty and the harsh bullying for being a trans person. By the age of 16, after her family home was foreclosed on, she faced the cold reality of being a homeless teen. Despite these challenges, Maya discovered comfort, support, and friendships within Chicago's LGBTQIA ballroom community. There, she met her mentor, another trans woman by the name of Ebony, who helped lift Maya onto a path of success, self-worth, and confidence. Ebony's dedication and impact on Maya's success inspired her to share the same dedication to others. And today, Maya serves as co-chair for the Community Development and Engagement Committee of the Chicago HIV Integrated Services Council, also known as CAHIE. Recently, she was recognized by Windy City Times as one of Chicago's 30 under 30 for her contributions to the community. And she continues to support Howard Brown Health, AIDS Healthcare Foundation, University of Chicago Medicine, and Center on Halsted. Maya continues to be a leader, voice, and role model for her LGBTQIA peers, and she is deeply passionate about helping to make the dreams and ambitions of her brothers and sisters a reality. Timothy Jackson, some of us call him Tim, which I'll do today, is a native of Jackson, Mississippi, by way of Huntsville, Alabama. He is the Director of Government Relations for AIDS Foundation Chicago, with extensive experience in HIV, LGBTQ advocacy, grassroots organizing, political campaigns, and lobbying. Prior to joining the staff of AFC, he worked as a staffer for a member of Congress and served as board president of Thrive Alabama, an AIDS service organization and federally qualified health center, providing medical and support services care to the people of North Alabama, including people living with or vulnerable to HIV. And then last but not least, we have Aaron Tax. Aaron is the Director of Advocacy for SAGE. He advocates for LGBT inclusive federal aging policies that account for the unique needs of LGBT older adults. Until June 2011, Aaron served as the legal director at Service Members Legal Defense Network, also known as SLDN, the leading organization challenging Don't Ask, Don't Tell in Congress and in the courts. He started there as a staff attorney in 2006, and for nearly 5 years at SLDN, he took part in a multifaceted approach to advancing civil rights of LGBT service members through law, policy, outreach, and education. Aaron is a graduate of Cornell University with honors and distinction and the George Washington University Law School with honors. He currently resides in Washington, D.C. I will add, Aaron doesn't have it on here, he's quite the foodie, as is Tim actually, but I've actually been at conferences with Aaron, and we have gone to some amazing restaurants that I would not have known about on my own. So that is our wonderful panel today. And now that you know who's here, let's get started with the conversation. So it's an understatement to say that 2020 will go down in history as a year to remember. There is a lot going on. As if a global pandemic wasn't enough, there's a rumble moving across the world as protests emerge in united anger about the murder of George Floyd by police and in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. And lest we forget, this is also an election year and a census year. So with all of that going on, I want to know, before we really get started, how are you taking care of yourselves these days? And Aaron, I want to start with you.
Well, two things I'm focusing on. I go cycling around DC every day. So that's where I take pictures like this of the new Black Lives Matter Plaza in DC. And I'm working on learning how to meditate. So those two things.
On the meditation front, I got you. I use an app called Headspace.
Oh, nice.
Wonderful.
Yes, I'm using Insight Timer. If anyone's
don't
looking
know
for
that.
a good free app.
Okay. Headspace is not free. Okay, Don, how are you taking care of yourself?
Well, you know me, I've always got to get involved in something. And unfortunately, COVID-19 has become very real and very personal to me. And I'm involved with the elder care, again, of my 88-year-old aunt and 90-year-old uncle, who both miraculously have survived and beat the 20% survival rate. So that keeps me quite involved these days.
Wow, Don, that is a good news story to hear.
Yeah, right.
That is.
That's why nobody asked me out.
I know, but you know, we don't hear stories about survival. We hear stories mostly about deaths, which are important, but people also know that people are surviving. So
Yes.
thank you for sharing that. Maya, what about you? How are you taking care of yourself?
Well, I'm back. I think for me during this time, the most I can do is try to keep myself amongst friends. You know, invite them over. We'll play spades and have a cocktail every now and again. And it's about just keeping yourself sane. Going through this process. Social isolation has been at an all-time high, and myself dealing with depression and anxiety and all those type of things. This is the most time that you cannot be around the masses, but pull together a selective few that you are most comfortable with and that you are most safe with, and just try to have some things. It doesn't have to be all the time, and it could be every now and then. And that's what I do for the most part if I'm not watching TV.
Thank you for that. Connecting with friends, that's what's saving me right now. Of course, my wife is in the house too, but friendships help too. And last but not least, Tim, how are you taking care of yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Kim. I have rediscovered my love for reading and really understanding how to lose yourself in a good book. And so that has been awesome. I've also relaunched my food blog recently, so I've been doing a lot of cooking. So I just love doing something that has absolutely nothing to do with current events. So.
And give people the name of that blog, because I've been on it.
A Man About Food.
A Man About Food. Y'all check it out. The food is beautifully photographed and looks delicious. Thank you, Tim. So Don, let's come back to you. You have been an advocate, as you mentioned, for many years, and some of what we're witnessing right now, in terms of the protests in particular, and what has motivated them, feels very familiar, but also feels, at least for me, there's some of it that's a little bit new. So I'd love to know what your take is as someone who has seen these sort of movements go up and down and flatline and all of that. Your take on what's happening now, and if you could add to, how is this the same and different from like the early stages of the AIDS crisis?
Okay, well, one thing about being 70 years old is that I've been around a day or two and seen a lot of things. My own social activism started back when I was 13 years old in 1963, the summer of the March on Washington, led by Dr. Martin Luther King, that's famous for his I Have a Dream speech. And then I started high school that same summer, and we immediately got involved in racial justice issues. And as I grew up, of course, I was part of the people growing up in the late 60s and the early 70s, the era of the first youth generation rebellion in the United States, when we began to reject the things that we told as we became aware of things that were real. So fighting for civil rights, opposing the war, fighting for the end of poverty were the things that we were about. And of course, that movement, the civil rights movement, was the progenitor of other significant social advancement movements of the time, the women's movement, the LGBT movement, and all grew out of those same kinds of things. So it's been a part of my life for a long, long time. And what I see today is not a distinct movement, nothing new. I see it as a continuance of my time. And I identify with young people who are involved in it, but I think there's another group out there that people haven't noticed yet, but they will before it's over. And that'll be us old timers who have been dealing with these issues for a long, long time. And the activism of our youth will present itself again as we are aging, because some of these issues are not resolved. 2020 is, as you say, a very significant year. And I think that the pandemic itself is just a warning to humanity that two long-standing issues have to be resolved. We have to change the way that we as human beings relate to each other collectively and globally. And two, we have to take care of this planet. We can't kick either of those issues down the road any longer. And that's what this pandemic is here to remind us. And you asked me about HIV. And HIV, of course, is a pandemic also, and it continues. And it was the pandemic of people who were marginalized and socially disadvantaged. And it is still with us, and there's still issues. It has been, as many issues have been, whitewashed in our history. And there are people who think of it still primarily as a condition in the gay community, when in fact, both throughout the United States and around the world, it's also an issue of color and class. And those things have to be remembered. And I hope that we will actually draw more parallels between the two. While we've had very progressive leaders here in Chicago and Illinois that advocated for issues around racial disparity, I hope that they will also start to collect information in the LGBT community, because I think there's a story to be told from MSMs and probably young women too around COVID-19. So I hope we'll address those issues.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate you making those parallels and drawing those distinctions as well. Maya, Don mentioned starting his activism early, and you have too. So I would love to hear, as a person who's not 70, what
keep working at it, honey. It arrives faster than you'll ever imagine.
Don't we know it? I turned 58 this year. What is your take on what's happening now, and how does this moment feel to you?
I think for me, it's so surreal. I don't think, for me, I'm coming into a time now to where my pandemic is necessarily the COVID-19 pandemic. From Don's perspective, it was the pandemic of the HIV/AIDS era. But when I sit and I align the two, I can honestly say there's so much similarity when you break it all down. Because in the beginning of both of each one, it was said that only white folks were able to get this disease or this virus. Then it went from that to it was contracted in mostly Black individuals. Now we're breaking it down to where it's about race and gender. You know what I mean? Only females or only males. So for me, when being a younger person that is doing this work, it's very scary. Because we trying to control and tackle this whole HIV/AIDS epidemic and be able to provide needed information to educate those that are coming up. But as well, now we have to tackle this whole other aspect. You have younger individuals who want to go out, they want to have fun, they want to have a good time, you know, and then we had the whole epidemic of drugs and liquor, and now we have to worry about, oh, are you washing your hands, and are you, you know, you're social distancing. And it's not that they necessarily don't want to, but now we still have to grasp knowledge and education and understanding on what to tell them. You know, it's very scary because it's like each time I myself turn around, you know, if a person sneezes, now we have changed the ways of how, you know, we are going to portray a person if they sneeze, you know, all of these different things that are playing a part in the redirection of the world. But it's kind of like how shoes will be in style one time and then they'll come back around and they're in style again. You know, that's how I foresee it. And that could be a bad way to break it down, but it's the honest truth to it. You know, for me, it hit close to home. You know, it hits really close to home because now dealing with this whole COVID-19 thing, my mom has a vulnerable system, living with lupus. You know, that's scary to me. You know what I mean? So how can I allow myself to say, okay, well, mom, it's going to be okay, knowing that she's getting sick left and right. You know what I mean? But then you have all of these different theories that are presented to us as a people. And we're like, okay, well, you all said that these are the symptoms of COVID-19. And then now you have folks who were sitting at home, and just because they wake up with a sore throat that could be portrayed as strep throat, they done ran out and went to the hospital, and it's not even that. You know, it's so much things, it's so many answers to be, it's so many questions to be answered that are not necessarily answered. And again, we go back into saying that when the influenza pandemic happened, you know, it was stay inside and stay away. It's kind of a bit of a mind-boggling thing for me to say that this is the thing to suppress something. This is the thing that will to prevent something, is just by staying at home. And even furthermore, as me being a young person, I'm very big on you know, seniors living with HIV. And then now we also got, again, we're talking about what's aligning. You have the COVID-19 pandemic, but we're saying stay at home and social distance, but we have homeless individuals who don't have a home to go to social distance. We don't have those individuals who are seniors to be able to get the needed medical assistance that they need because they don't have insurance. So what are we doing about those individuals? And then you have people that are in offices, elected officials, and all these other individuals who are utilizing funds to do other things. So now we're talking about a domino effect of things that are affecting us as a people. You know what I mean? And then, of course, it always falls back on the people of color, Black and brown individuals.
Wow. And then you dropped all that wisdom and was like, okay, done. So you've named a lot, and as well as you, Don, and you've named a lot of systems and a lot of things that are actually impacted by part of our topic. In addition to COVID, is the census. And so I want to turn to Tim. And you know, in the bio I read that before you came to AFC, you did work for a U.S. congressperson. So I'm sure the census and looking at those numbers had a big impact on your work. So tell us about the ways the census is used to make decisions, particularly at the federal level, but feel free to add at the state level too, given your role at AFC.
Sure, great question. Census really, although we don't realize it, it is such a big part of who we are and how we interact with the world. On a federal level, I saw, you know, if you're a student from a low income household and you're looking to get a Pell Grant to go to college, the U.S. Department of Education uses census data for that process. If your city or state needs a new highway, the U.S. Department of Transportation uses census data to determine exactly where that money is going to go. You know, of course, Congress each year has 12 appropriations bills that they are responsible for passing, that funds the entire government, everything ranging from, like I said, Pell Grants, schools, housing, healthcare, every aspect of our lives. And so Those are some of the very practical ways that you see how the census is used on the federal government level and to an extent state government as well. But then you also look kind of when you look at the way that it's formed, the census is used according to the Constitution, which is every 10 years it's a population to get those numbers for the country's population, and then how representatives in the U.S. House of Representatives are apportioned. Of course, 435 members. We're looking right now, by all estimates, you're going to have about 10 states that are set to lose congressional districts, including one right here in Illinois. And so with that, you have states that will be losing districts. That means you have states that will be gaining districts. Basically, the way that whole process goes here in the state of Illinois, the state legislature is responsible for redrawing those lines for both congressional districts and the state house and state senate districts. And so why is that important? That's important because essentially what you're doing is, say the Democrats control both the state house and the state senate. They can literally redraw the map that would make maybe say a Southern Republican district, Southern Illinois Republican district, a bit more competitive than it's been, in past years. And so that goes a long way in really determining who our elected officials are. And so that it's something to kind of keep in the back of your mind whenever you're looking forward to. You may also want to look also in this year's presidential election. For the first time in forever, Texas is considered a battleground state. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, why is that? They're a battleground state because after the 2010 census, they picked up 4 electoral votes, which is determined based on your congressional representation. And so this year, they're expected to pick up an additional 3. And so how does that matter? You look at cities like Houston or Dallas, Fort Worth that are gaining in population. Population centers tend to vote heavily for Democrats, which means Democrats vote more. You make a state that has historically been, for the past 100 years, a Republican stronghold when it comes to presidential politics, and you automatically make it a battlefield. It's a battleground state, rather. And so that's kind of a way census practically it's used, but then also when you look at elections.
I'm glad you spent some time deconstructing that, because I think that's a piece of this that people miss. And it just became a really stark reality to me during the election night in 2016. Partisanship aside, Illinois is a blue state surrounded by red states. We are an island of blue, and that means that, or has meant, that Illinois' policies can be much more progressive and much more helpful to the multiple identities within our community, within the LGBTQ+ umbrella. And a lot of the states around us, not so much, with some exceptions you get down to the local municipal levels. So this stuff is really important. It sounds very abstract. It sounds like I don't understand why this is important, but where the line is drawn makes a big difference. So thank you for that. And so Aaron, keeping with the census, as we talked about in your bio, SAGE is a leader in bringing LGBTQ+ voices into the aging sector. And so I'd like for you to spend some time talking about why the census is so important in this sector, the aging sector, and also feel free to talk about the work that SAGE has been doing to add LGBT+ or maintain LGBT questions in the census and other national surveys.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me here, Kim. So I think, you know, a starting point is the old adage that if we're not counted, we don't count. And I think we see that in the way the Trump administration is viewing data collection across the federal government these days. And I think it's no secret that it's been rather hostile to the LGBT community. One of the ways they're trying to diminish the power of the LGBT community and to make sure that we're not counted in policy making is to erase us from different types of data collection. One example of that, as we've been talking about, is the census, where it wasn't guaranteed that LGBT people would have been included in 2020. It was certainly a possibility. And we know that the Trump administration decided they did not want that to happen. And what that means is that it's not going to be until at least 2030, which is kind of insane, but not until 2030, until LGBT folks might possibly be included in the census. And for all the reasons that Tim shared, that's, you know, really a shame because it really impacts the amount of resources that we can get for our communities. In addition to that, we saw that early on in the administration, there was a survey called the National Survey of Older Americans Act Participants. And granted, most people have not heard of the survey or the Older Americans Act, but it funds important programs like Meals on Wheels, which most people have heard of. And all that survey did was try to figure out if programs like Meals on Wheels and other similar programs were meeting the needs of the most vulnerable people across the country. And one of the questions in that survey that the Obama administration included asked people if they identified as LGBT. And the one and only question in this more than 100-page survey that the Trump administration decided they needed to delete because the survey was too long and too onerous happened to be the LGBT question. And I don't think that's any sort of coincidence that that's the one and only question they decided they needed to remove. So we and the Pride Action Tank and other groups around the country pushed back. And thankfully, we got the LGB question put in. But I think it's really no secret that this administration really, really hates transgender people. And they succeeded, unfortunately, in keeping out that transgender question. So I think that's one of those things that's on our list. If we ever have a pro-equality person back in the White House, that we would ask them to reinstate. And again, we want to know if trans older people are getting Meals on Wheels and other critical programs that they need to remain independent in their community, which to me seems pretty harmless. So, you know, I guess every day you can kind of scratch your head and wonder why, you know, this administration really doesn't like us so much, but they've made that abundantly clear. So I think those are two examples of why data collection is important. And then with respect to some of the unique needs of LGBT older people, if we look at the data we do have, which is limited, but we do have some data, we see higher rates of social isolation. So we see that LGBT folks are twice as likely to be single and 4 times less likely to have kids than their heterosexual and cisgender counterparts, which means when they're facing, you know, crises like the COVID crisis, you know, they're even more alone than the population at large. And less, you know, able to care for themselves, less likely to have someone in their house that can help them out. And, you know, when you're not supposed to be hanging out with people outside your own household, that makes it really tough in the, you know, the time of an epidemic. We see higher poverty rates. That's particularly pronounced among lesbian couples with twice the poverty rate of their heterosexual counterparts. And again, think about COVID and other things happening. Maybe you have a spare bedroom in your house and normally you'd rent that out on Airbnb. Or maybe you drive for Uber or Lyft at night. Can't do that so much anymore in COVID. So there goes another source of income. And, you know, there's still a lack of culturally competent services and supports out there. So I think even think about Chicago, where we have a SAGE affiliate, where you have LGBT-friendly housing and an LGBT-friendly meal program. You might think in Chicago, of all cities in the country, that's a place where people could be themselves and feel comfortable. But even in a place like Chicago, it's really important to have those places and those spaces where people can congregate and feel like that they can be themselves. And unfortunately, again, think about the pandemic, people can't get together anymore. So people who are already isolated, who are already facing higher rates of poverty, higher rates of food insecurity, aren't able to get that support they need. So I think that's why it's, you know, such a trying time. And then to link that all back to the census, you know, as Tim talked about, that funds all sorts of programs like social services, Section 8 vouchers, SNAP, Medicaid, so on and so forth. So you put all these factors together, the challenges we're facing just as LGBT people, LGBT older people, generally speaking, pile onto that the challenges they face because of the pandemic, and then pile onto that, the additional challenges we face because generally speaking, at least according to the Center for American Progress and the task force, who put out some great resources on this, LGBT folks, people of color, immigrants, people experiencing homelessness, folks in rural areas, people with lower incomes, renters, and other folks are less likely to be counted in the census. So it's this double whammy where we're in greater need, but less likely to be counted, and that means there's fewer resources available for our communities.
I kind of want to jump in, if that's okay, really quickly. I think that another issue that we are having too with a lot of this is when we talk about data, we have to stop, and it really bothers me that they group trans-identified folks into one group. You cannot get the needed data that you need to understand what is needed and for what group of trans-identified folks if you're not breaking that down. Just because I say I'm trans-identified does not mean that I want to be grouped as with trans men and trans women. We have to learn how to break that down. And I feel like society and the world and everyone tends to take that choice from us as trans-identified folks. Allow us that choice to put ourselves where we foresee ourselves. It's distasteful that you cannot find spaces for trans-identified folks because we do go through domestic violence, i.e. I was a person who went through domestic violence. There's no shelters for us. That does not make any sense to me that I can't go to a shelter, a male shelter, because I'm at risk of being re-traumatized with sexual abuse and discrimination and everything else. You don't want me to go to a woman's shelter because, oh, you're gonna touch my child and all these other re-traumatizing things. So I think that when we think about this census, we also have to think about having that voice in that aspect as well. Because again, allow us that choice. Yeah, you give us that option on applications here and there where it's other, but I'm not an other. I'm not an other. I'm a human being that deserves to have that choice to be able to select who I am, not you select other for me.
Yeah. I think what you're naming, Maya, and what Aaron also pointed out is we still have a lot of advocacy to do around these questions and around the census, the national surveys. One thing that Megan Murray last week talked to us about from the task force, she's the policy director, and the task force has done a lot of advocacy along with other organizations like SAGE to queer up the census to the extent that we can do it. We're still trying. Megan pointed out that we also have to work on local data sets because there's almost nothing when it comes to the LGBTQ communities. And we're very fortunate to have data, two needs assessments from the Morton Group that focused on the LGBTQ community. Pride Action Tank is going to be doing a Southside needs assessment of the LGBTQ community, but there are many places that don't have this. So in addition to these national surveys, where we've got to get better questions as well, there are also local surveys and needs assessments that we really need to be pushing on because there's just very little data on LGBTQ communities.
Absolutely, Kim. If I could just jump in, just something else that I would share too. It's the American Community Survey, which is a portion of the census, which actually asks more in-depth questions than the census probably ever will. It is critical that we have those type of questions on there so we can get the correct data that's needed for communities to provide some of those services that Maya was talking about. It's also important too to look at not just data from that point, but also research that a lot of times for the trans community, they're lumped in with MSMs a lot of times. And so that's not helpful either. And so we have to make sure that we are doing right by each of these the individual group of people because they have their own set of needs and things that need to be addressed specifically to them. And when you don't have the correct data, you can't make correct decisions.
Amen. I want to remind the audience that we're going to be taking questions in a little bit. So go ahead and post those onto the Pride Action Tank or AIDS Foundation Chicago Facebook pages, and also for those of you who are joining us via Zoom to post them in the chat box. So this next question is for all of you. And given what I mentioned in the intro about the similarities and issues that both older adults and youth in the LGBTQ community face, and what honestly what we've been talking about these last few minutes, what are some on the ground and or policy and administrative changes that we should be advocating for youth, for older adults, or just in general for those two groups? And let's start with Maya. We're getting a little bit of feedback from someone. I'm not sure who that is. But Maya, if we could start with you, that would be great.
Okay. So for me, I think that, again, it's providing more space, you know, having more opportunities for us as trans-identified folks, people of color, to have more spaces in those rooms and at those tables to be able to speak specifically, like you said, to our needs. You know what I mean? We have to stop allowing folks to be in those spaces and have not even experienced what these individuals have experienced to say what we need and what we don't need. I think that in itself has to stop. We have to have more spaces such as this. Allow us to be more vocal in what our trauma is and what we go through. You know, I think that a lot of the issue is, and I'm grateful to have been in those spaces to hear and see what is happening and is not happening. You know, to hear that most people who have not been in the struggle is walking down the street as a trans-identified person or experiencing homelessness or drug addiction are the people who most say, oh, well, I don't think that deserves to go there. You know, I think that in itself, it is the most re-traumatizing thing to actually experience again. And you will hear me say this a lot, choices being taken away. I think that you have folks that don't understand, that will put themselves in our shoes and can't even walk in them. So I think for me, it's just allowing us to have more seats at the table, allowing more trans directed collectives, and not always including us into those spaces to where it's trans identified and MSMs, white and queer and black. Allow specifically trans identified folks in itself.
Okay, thank you. And what are you thinking, Tim, in terms of what changes we should be advocating for?
Sure. You know, you mentioned earlier about the LGBTQ community needs assessment that was done last year. And preparing for this panel discussion, I just kind of flipped through it and it just kind of stood out to me a couple of points that both younger people, and I think the assessment kind of listed age 24 and younger, I believe. And then you have your older adults. Some of the same issues kept popping up that they talked about. They talked about discrimination. They talked about access to healthcare, affordable housing, youth services, more LGBTQ advocacy and friendly healthcare services. And it was alarming to me because it was on both of them. And the way the report was, it split them, but both of those, all of those issues were on both, in both groups. And so what does all this mean? It really looks like how we craft our advocacy must be done so in a very comprehensive and a community-centered way. We must advocate for policies and laws that benefit the wide spectrum of our communities. As I just mentioned just a few moments ago, each one of the individual groups inside of our much larger community have its own needs that we need to address. And you know, just for instance, we know that the rate of HIV is rising among Black and Latinx gay men, young people, trans communities, cisgender women, African American women. We must be kind of seriously looking at the options that are available to us. We have something called PrEP. PrEP is awesome. It's once a day pill, pre-exposure prophylaxis, but we must be intentional about the work that we're doing, meaning that the community interventions that we're using must look like the community. Right now, the people that take PrEP more often than not are white gay men. That's great that they're on it. But the numbers suggest, the data suggests, those groups that I just mentioned just a moment ago should be on PrEP. And so you really have to ask the question, well, why are they not on PrEP? One, we have to make it easier for them to access PrEP. Right now, when you look at AIDS View, which is a great resource that you can really kind of center down to Chicago, Cook County, statewide, and you're looking at specific data, you look at where PrEP access locations are, they're on the northern part of the city. Well, we understand Chicago's racial makeup. When it affects Black and Latinx communities, they're on the west and the south side. So why are they not there? To be honest with you, you have to go clean across the city to get access to PrEP. That's not access, that's a barrier. And so one way that we are working on that at AFC is a bill we worked on last year, a youth PrEP bill, was passed by the state legislature. And basically what that did was it took away parental consent requirement for youth to access prevention methods. We have to be very intentional again to take away any of those barriers where we can start meeting some of these challenges, whether it be access to PrEP or other healthcare, whether it is to access services like domestic violence shelters or homeless, for people experiencing homelessness, services for them. That's how we really hone down and really get to the heart of fixing some of these issues.
Because I gotta speak on this. I hear a lot of the
Go ahead.
I hear a lot of the points that you're saying, but I think to add on to that as an additive, I think stigma is another issue that we face, especially when we talk about the HIV and AIDS transition of things.
Absolutely.
I think that especially when it comes to our community as people of color, LGBTQ plus communities, stigma withhold a lot of that, even when it comes to PrEP, because you have this stigma around the whole PrEP pill being a part of the medication that treats HIV. So we have to still also address that as well. But then when we talk about actually providing community or providing individuals with these resources and these services, we also have to think about the trauma that comes with organizations. We hire people into positions that comes from communities that go back and they will say things about folks and they will put people's information out there. So now you have put in position a person who don't want to come to this organization because, oh, this person is going to go and tell my business, or, oh, this is going to happen to me here. So it's a number of different things that, of course, we face. And of course, as Kim has said, it's so much that still needs to be done. But I feel like this is a start to be in platforms like this, to make this very clear to the masses as we being on Zoom and on live, to really understand that these are the issues that we are having. We talk about PrEP and protection and all of those things. Those are things that are key things that help. But I think that the most unprotective thing that we do as a people is not allow folks to have space to talk about it comfortably. I believe that if we break that barrier in life and allow folks to say, okay, well, this is what I'm dealing with, or this is what I may be going through, and not feel like a person is going to judge me or turn me down or put me in a place to where I feel disgusting or anything like that, we will get a lot more of this virus under control.
That's right. Starts with having those conversations.
Absolutely.
Aaron, so what are your thoughts about some of the on-the-ground work and or policy administrative changes we should be advocating for, given that LGBTQ youth and older adults are facing some of the same issues?
Sure. I mean, the number one thing that comes up in my mind right now, just in the wake of the Title VII decision, which many of you know came down last week, where the Supreme Court confirmed that sex is defined in the Civil Rights Act, specifically in Title VII, which refers to employment protections across the country, includes LGBT folks. And they, emphatically and explicitly stated that. So now, wherever you live in the country, if you're in the deepest red state to Chicago or wherever you are, you're protected in employment from discrimination on the basis of your sexual orientation and or gender identity, which is great news. And we hope that is soon extended into the fair housing context in Title IX with respect to schools and in other places. But what we do know is even if that does happen, it's still not going to protect all the places and spaces accessed by LGBT older people and LGBT youth and everyone in between. So I would say one of the top legislative priorities in the LGBT community right now is passage of something called the Equality Act, which is a comprehensive LGBT civil rights bill, which covers not only employment, which now we have taken care of, thankfully, but housing, access to credit, which is important to lots of communities, especially people of color and other marginalized communities within the LGBT community. Jury service, which sounds like a kind of a funny outlier, but imagine if you're going on a jury and they say we don't want any trans people in the jury pool because they're going to be biased in favor of the trans defendant or the trans person who's filing the case. Like, you want a jury of your peers. So that's kind of key at that point in time. Public accommodations, that would be like senior centers. Think about youth shelters and other places like that. We want those types of places protected. So the idea is that the Equality Act would come in and protect every single one of those areas of interacting with public life in any which way that are not yet covered by non-discrimination protections. And maybe in Chicago you have some of those protections on the books right now, but you don't want to think about having to, if you go across the border into Indiana or something, losing all those protections. So the idea is that you'll be able to travel wherever you want or live wherever you want in the United States and have those protections. So right now, the president has said he would veto it. We know it's not being taken up by this Senate, even though it has been passed out of the House. And I think, the lesson for me there is that this election is more important than ever, not just for passing the Equality Act, but for all types of issues that we care about, like taking the pandemic seriously and not treating it as a hoax, and protecting people's right to vote, and respecting the fight for racial equality, all sorts of reasons, and all those issues that are at play in this election. So I think, my big takeaway, if I want to have one out of this conversation, is that all of this flows from voting, because the people, if you vote, then your views can be represented by your representatives in Washington. And then we can change all these policies and enact some policies that are pro-LGBT equality.
Yes, it is an election year, in addition to all the other things that are happening. And we know that voting is not the end of the story.
Correct.
We still have to advocate for everything that is needed for our communities and beyond. And we need to hold any elected official accountable, even when they purport to be our friends. But if we don't get them in office, we'll continue with this nonsense that we're seeing right now. And Aaron, you mentioned earlier how this vehemently opposed this administration is to transgender people. It is an abomination. It's it's woo. And then when you look at all the other intersections, Black trans people, Latinx trans people, I mean, it's awful. So we gotta get that change. Don, let's get you in here, and then the next thing we're gonna do after Don is go back to Jace. So Don, for you, again, given these intersections in issues between LGBTQ youth and older adults, what are the things that you think we should be working on right now? And you are on mute.
How's that?
There you go.
All right. We need to work on what we often philosophically say is a basis of organization in our community. We speak of the general LGBT community as being a community of choice because we are not a homogeneous community. We are a heterogeneous community with people coming in from different places throughout the general society, bringing in the socialization of those communities of origin. And so we have to intentionally work against racism and sexism and classism and internalized heterosexism and transphobia to become a total community. And to do that, we first of all have to talk to each other. Most people don't know, most young people don't know that, in fact, many of the people who were participants in parts of our civil rights movement as early as Stonewall, many of those people are still alive. Many of them live with me, these old coots, they all live with me. No, but oftentimes we grow into being irrelevant because we're older, and we need to promote interaction amongst the generations. We need to become a community of choice. We need to support each other. Young people are our legacy. Older people are the shoulders upon which young people stand. It is necessary to invent the wheel because there are many editions of the wheel already there. And we have to communicate much more effectively around those issues. And with the institutions within our communities, we have to get rid of the generational segregation. At our community center for the city, for instance, we have separate programs for youth and for seniors, and there is no place and no program where those generations ever come together. In order to advocate best for our entire community, we have to have spaces where the community can come together.
Thank you so much for that, Don. Yes, much more multi-generational programming is needed. So we're going to take a pause for the panelists and bring Jace back. And again, I want to remind people to please post your questions, because when we come back, we are going to do a little bit of Q&A before coming back to the panel. So take it away for us, Jace.
So this one is an original song titled Carry On. And it's really my thoughts about what's going on and how we can be resilient as we navigate the world right now. The sun has reached its zenith. Let the light lead the way. The road has narrowed, but the path is straight. Let your fears subside on this journey of faith. Walk through the mud as a field awaits. Go blindly into the distance. Muster up the faith. Omens carry the message. Instincts lead the way. Carry on, carry on. So much to fight for. You're never alone. Carry on, carry on. So much to fight for. you're never alone. Be a silent witness to your thoughts. Use history to light your torch. Taking what's all around in nature's warmth. Awake to your body, feel the rush of calm. The journey wouldn't be complete without winter storms. Carry on, carry on. So much to fight for, you're never alone. Carry on, carry on. So much to fight for, you're never alone. Don't get up right away and start the day. Do a bunch of must-haves before you even pray. Stillness sets the tone, elevates your life state. Gratitude is abundance in every way. So carry on, carry on. So much to fight for, you're never alone. Carry on, carry on. So much to fight for, you're never alone. So call up them angels all around. Spirit speaks as you move your feet. Destined for greatness, there's no defeat. On the other side, the sun will peak. So no looking back at what life was. Knowing this moment, you're covered in love. So call up the angels all around. Spirit speaks as you move your feet. Destined for greatness, there's no defeat. On the other side, the sun will peak. Oh, carry on, carry on. We were made strong. Oh, carry on, carry on, carry on. We were made strong. Thank you. I'm Jace William.
Jace. Yes, yes. That is a song for these times, my brother. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you. We had Story Devereaux on last week because I am a firm believer that the artists are the ones who keep us sane through the movement and articulate many things in a short period of time in a way that we just feel it. And sometimes we need to feel it. Sometimes we're too much in our heads, and sometimes we're too much in our fear. And you have just touched many people. Your song reminds me of a quote that I have on my wall from a rabbi a couple of days after Trump was elected to office, and I was in Jerusalem with a number of other LGBTQ folks. And we were, of course, distraught. And oh, Aaron was there, that's right. And we kept asking the speakers questions like, how are you doing this work in this moment with this regime? And one of the things she said, and I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, was you do the right thing and you continue to do the right thing until the path emerges. And so that's something that has carried me through these 4 years, or however many, it's 4, yes, 4 years. And your song has now just been added to the things that I hold on to. Thank you so much, Jace. I really appreciate you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. So we are going to go to questions for now, and we have quite a few. So thank you all for putting these questions in, and Jack has been adding questions from Facebook as well. And this first question for the panelists, it actually comes from, and I see multiple questions here, Craig. It comes from one of our AFC board members, Craig Johnson. And Craig asked, stigma is associated with HIV, as Maya mentioned, but also associated with sexual orientation, gender identity, COVID, and aging in the LGBTQ community. What can be done generally to reduce stigma, particularly in conservative components of communities of color, as well as white communities? And what does the work look like to reduce and ultimately eliminate stigma? Who should be engaged in that work? There's a lot there. Anyone can jump in for that question.
Well, I would say that the first thing to do in dealing with stigma is for the people who are the objects of that stigma to reject it themselves, to reject it in their minds, because if we in fact internalize those values, we become victims. And we don't want to be victims, we want to be survivors.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Don. Maya, I saw you were about to jump in there too.
Yeah, another piece of that too is, to add on to that, is also, well, I guess it'd be two things. For me, it would be the presentation of that information. I think that oftentimes when things are presented to us, it's presented to us in a hysterical form. So it puts us as a person who is receiving it to be like, oh my goodness, what is going to happen to me? Or, oh my goodness, if you do this, this is going to happen. You know, although it may be something that is critical and something that we do have to be protective of, I think that the presenter shall be very cautious in how they present it to the people. As far as, it was another piece, my goodness. Oh, as far as who should be presenting that information, I think it all goes back into those peer groups and providing more space of individuals who are educated or trained on how to present this to individuals. More so individuals who are of that specific experience, excuse me, tongue twister. They should be the ones to be able to deliver that information. You know, I don't think that we have enough platforms for individuals that are young, i.e. speaking to the HIV/AIDS epidemic. We don't have enough young people who are comfortable enough because of that specific stigma to talk about, oh, well, this is my experience. You know, although this is what it was years ago, we are in 2020 and medications are different. You know what I mean? I have been on this medication for such and such time, and I'm very healthy. You know, it's all about, then we go back and thinking about the PrEP positions. We had, when I was at the University of Chicago, we had PrEP Chicago to educate on the importance of continuously using it. How is it effective if you continue to use it? Why is it that we don't have conversations about HIV/AIDS medications to where if you continuously take your medicine, you can be undetectable? Undetectable is untransmittable. Why don't we have those conversations? You know, why do we have those platforms? And you know, it's nothing to the PrEP and the PEP, you know, process, but I think that they presented that and they had all of it laid out. You know, provide these spaces to talk about how to prevent, but we don't have spaces to talk about how to protect and how to be healthy. You know what I mean? We have the providers that are saying those things, but we need more individuals from that specific peer group.
Thank you, Maya. Tim, you and Aaron want to get in there?
Sure. I will add, Maya, you just touched on just a few moments ago, you said something about conversations. Some conversations need to be had, whether that is peer-to-peer, whether that is peer-to-provider when we talk about stigma, or whether it's peer-to-community. And Craig, in your comments, your questions, you talked about the conservative components of communities of color. Amen to that. You're spot on with that. As someone who has lived in the deep South, the Bible Belt for the majority of my life, I completely understand that. Some of those conversations need to be had in those Black churches. I've done some of that work. It is hard. It's hard conversations to have, but they need to be had nonetheless. And who should be engaged in that work? The people who are the objects of that stigma. Don, you were spot on with that. That does take a while. Some people are faster to come to it than others. I shared on a call that I was with earlier today, I was HIV positive for 6 years before I even told anybody. And so, you know, there's internalized stigma that I was dealing with myself. But now that I get to say that out loud, that may help one person. And that combats stigma right there. And so that's who should be engaged in the work, the object of the stigma. The work is hard, it's messy, it's going to be uncomfortable. But that's the reason why you should do it.
I always say if it's not messy and uncomfortable, you're not doing it right. You can take that however you want.
I received that.
Erin, did you want to add anything to that before I go to the next?
That's a good one.
I don't know what a good segue is there, but I think, I think about stigma in older people. So that's like a whole other layer of stigma is older folks. And in particular, you think about HIV. And 1 in 2 people now who are HIV positive in the country are over the age 50. In some cities, it's about 70%, like in New York and San Francisco. It's probably pretty much up there in Chicago too, I bet. And, when people, whether it's doctors or LGBT older people themselves, feel like they can't talk about sex or they can't talk about their sexual orientation or gender identity and be honest with the doctor, then those conversations aren't going to happen. And if those conversations don't happen, then people are not going to be healthy because they're not going to get the health care they need. And so I think there's plenty of work to be done, whether it's in the medical community, the gerontology community, HIV providers, other providers of healthcare, and then older people themselves to encourage them to be comfortable to talk about their sexuality and their sexual practices, and to get, to move beyond the stigma, because there are real health consequences if people can't be honest.
Thank you. So this next question is also for everyone, and I'm happy to say we have State Representative Yoni Pizer asking this question. So how do the panelists think we can all do a better job of reaching out to the LGBTQIA+ communities to make sure they participate in the census?
Well, I have a part to contribute to that, and actually goes beyond the census and includes voting, and it includes those times between the times when we vote. The biggest danger to our democratic republic right now is that people are buying into the idea that all politicians are crooked and that their participation in the society doesn't make any difference. We've got to change that idea. This is our country. It is run by we, the people, and we have to fight for what we believe in. The census is a measure of the population of our country. Has nothing to do with citizenship. So if you live here, you get counted. And it's important so that the good that we provide each other, the general welfare, is reinforced by the resources that we distribute amongst the American people. That's important. We can't give that up. We have to register, we have to vote to select our representatives. But even after we elect our representatives, we have to be actively engaged in the issues that deal with the governing of our country, our state, our communities, because it's for us. We cannot lose sight on that. We must be actively involved. We must know our history. We must know our civics. If we do not, then history gets whitewashed, it gets trivialized, lies are out there, and we suffer from that. So stand up, folks, stand up proud and be the Americans that we want to be to make this country what we want it to be.
Go ahead.
I think that to add on to that, because there was a lot of great information. I think also because in the beginning, when I started my processes of actually voting and doing census and everything, I was not very understanding to what was being presented to me. I think that a lot of the formats of things can be kind of discouraging to a person who may be challenged with education, or who may not understand things. A lot of them I understand. We say, okay, well, you know, learn these things, but we have to understand a lot of these individuals come from places of homelessness, and they come from places of poverty, and being told that you're not going to be nothing, and being told that you're not going to be this. So even if we can provide them with places of checkpoints to where they can access these things, to where, again, we're going back into peer groups, to where they have individuals who may know this information to help guide them through those type of processes, to let them know, okay, it's okay to not understand, but let me help you get through this. I think that the most discouraging thing is to want to do something but not know how to do something. And a lot of that will be very, very discouraging if a person is seen to go and vote and they see all of these different things and they're like, okay, well, I don't understand this information. So even if it's something to set up prior to this voting process or these census processes, to say, okay, well, this is what this may look like. You know, try to provide more spaces of learning, to learn how to do these things, and not just saying, okay, well, go and do this. You know, and then we get here to the polls and they're just picking anything. You know what I mean? So we have to be very cautious about that as well, for a person who don't know how to do those things.
Education. I think there's a little feedback on the line.
Yeah.
Okay. Education is so key to not only the census, but to a lot of the things that are that we need to do to really hit home on some of the things that we need to do to correct the ills of our community. But specifically with the census, meet people where they are. I am ecstatic this year for the first time ever that the census can be done online. But you know, the way that we reach people, you know, the old, you know, just to kind of give you a background, I work in campaigns. You know, I've done so my professional life, and so you do a lot of your politics where you used to call people on their landline. Well, guess what? A lot of people don't have landlines anymore. And so it's kind of the adapt or perish. And so with looking at the census, it's how are people getting their information? Is it through social media platforms? So if that's the way we need to reach people, especially our younger people, maybe on Snapchat, sure. Older people that may be on Facebook, sure, that's a great way. I feel kind of weird about that because I'm on both, and so I don't know about that. But anyway, you know, Instagram, what have you, whatever the social media platforms, you know, use them, but really meet people where they are, provide the education, explain the importance of it, and don't be afraid to be very simple with it. I think sometimes we have a way of overdoing things and making it a bit more complicated than it is. This is simply, as Don said, this is our way to get our population of people that live in the United States, not citizens. And then also we've talked earlier, I know Aaron and I both talked earlier about how the census impacts everyday life. And so I think if we can really make that education very simple, very engaging to people, and then reaching and meeting people where they are, I think we can get, you know, our numbers up when it comes to filling out the census in the LGBTQIA+ community.
Did you want to add anything, Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I was thinking about is, you know, not very long ago, you know, we were fighting in the Supreme Court for people to be able to take the census. And there was a huge, you know, struggle with the Trump administration that was trying to prevent undocumented people and to scare all sorts of immigrants and other people from even taking the census. And I think it shows you how much is at stake when one side is really willing to go so far to prevent people from even filling it out. And thankfully, the truth was disclosed and we won that fight. And I think it's more important than ever to think about that struggle, just like the struggle for people to vote and the fight for women to be able to vote. I was thinking about that today. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that even women couldn't vote in our country. And the fight for the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and all these things. That people have fought for these rights, and including the ability to take the census, and we don't want to take that right lightly. And it's important for everyone to do whatever they can, even if there's some challenges in doing so, to go out and fill it out. It feels like a little piece of paperwork, but it makes all the difference in the world.
Thank you all. I was hoping to get back to one more question for the panel, but the conversation has been so good and riveting and deep, and the questions have been so good that we have run out of time. So I want to thank the talented Jace William for offering his artistry tonight and those words, especially that last song and what you did with the first song. Masterful. I also want to thank our panelists, Don Bell, Maya Brown, Timothy Jackson, and Aaron Tax. Thank you also to the behind the scenes wizardry of Deontay Keys, Jack Rothman, and Jackie Thaney. Thank you to our co-sponsors, Howard Brown and AIDS Foundation Chicago, and our funders, Forefront and YWCA. I want to thank the audience for joining us tonight, and a special shout out to those who tuned in last week for the conversation. Don't forget to go to my2020census.gov to fill out your form. You have until October 31st. That was a question that was in the chat. And don't forget to vote in November. So thank you all again, and good night.